She wakes before everyone, prepares breakfast, and sits alone. Her greetings often go unnoticed. The sky outside was still wearing its sleepy gray as she quietly stepped into the kitchen. The house was silent, except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. She didn't need an alarm anymore. Years of habit had trained her body to rise before the sun. She lit the stove and began her morning ritual, kneading dough, slicing vegetables, boiling tea. Her hands moved like they were dancing to an old rhythm, one only she remembered. Each clink of the cup, each soft sizzle in the pan, echoed through the quiet house like a whisper from the past. By the time the first door creaked open upstairs, breakfast was ready. Plates lined up, bread warm, tea poured. She wiped her hands on the corner of her shawl and waited. Family discussions happen around her, not with her. Plans are made, decisions taken. She's just an observer. The living room was full of voices, light laughter, phone notifications, and overlapping conversations. Her son was seated on the edge of the couch, discussing something with his wife. The daughter-in-law's sister had come over too, and the two of them were deeply immersed in planning a family trip. "Let's do the Murray one. It's cooler this time of year," said the daughter-in-law. "Yeah, and I already talked to Kashif Bai. He can book the guest house," her son replied, not lifting his eyes from his phone. She sat in the corner chair, knitting a scarf, not because someone needed one, but because her hands felt too empty when still. Her eyes moved from face to face. Not one glance met hers. She cleared her throat lightly and tried. "Murray is beautiful in August, but the rain can block the roads." No one responded. Maybe they didn't hear. Or maybe they did, and just didn't weigh her words enough to respond. Later, her grandson came running in with a school notice. "Papa, we need to submit this by Monday," he said, handing the paper to his father. She stretched out her hand gently. "Let me see, Beta." But the boy pulled it back, laughing. "No, Dottie, it's for Papa." She smiled, but her eyes dimmed for a moment. Not with anger, not with jealousy, but with a quiet ache, the ache of being gently pushed out of moments she once owned. The conversations in the house were full, lively, and constant. But they passed through her like wind through leaves, touching, but never staying. She sat there, not unwanted, but unseen. Not unloved, but unneeded. And in that quiet realization, she learned that being left out didn't always come with slammed doors or harsh words. Sometimes, it arrived softly, like laughter that never asks if you're listening. Flashbacks reveal how she used to be the center. Birthdays, homework, celebrations, now just background noise. A sudden burst of laughter echoed from the lounge. She glanced up from her seat, knitting still in hand, and for a brief second, she smiled. Not because she was part of the joke, but because their happiness still meant something to her. Then, silence returned. For her, at least. She leaned back and closed her eyes. Memories began to flicker like warm candlelight behind her lids. Flashback. It was the same room, but it looked so different. Bright balloons, colored streamers, the scent of freshly baked cake. Her son stood on a chair, turning 8, face covered in chocolate frosting. She was in the center, clapping, laughing, holding the knife with him as everyone shouted, "Happy birthday." "Amy, help me with homework." "Amma, where's my blue shirt?" "Mama, dinner smells amazing." Every voice used to call for her. Every footstep led to her lap. Every celebration started in her kitchen and ended with her smile. Now. The same walls still stood, but no one called her name. Birthdays came and went, cakes ordered online, decorations done by someone else. No one asked her to help tie ribbons anymore. She heard her daughter-in-law say, "We'll just get catering this time. Saves time and effort." Effort. That's what her years had been. Not a burden, but love measured in hands that never rested. And now no one needed that love. At least, not the way they used to. She looked at the photograph on the side table, an old one, faded slightly. There she was, in the middle, surrounded by smiling faces. Now she was still there, in the house, in the routine, in the background, but no longer in the center. No longer the sun. Just a quiet planet, orbiting a home that had spun on without her. Her children are now closer to their spouses. She respects the change, but feels slowly erased. She stood by the window, watching the late afternoon sun melt over the rooftops. The soft orange light spilled into the room, touching her face with warmth, a warmth that no longer came from within the house. Behind her, in the lounge, her son and his wife sat close together, laughing over something on a phone screen. Their voices were low, affectionate, private. She didn't mind. In fact, part of her was grateful that her son had found someone who made him smile like that. That's all she ever prayed for. But sometimes, even gratitude carries a bruise. Earlier that day, she had entered their room with a small bowl of kheer, his childhood favorite. She had made it with care, tasting it 3 times, hoping he would notice the softness, the familiar flavor. He took it with a polite "Thanks, Ammy," and placed it on the side table without a second glance. A moment later, he turned to his wife and asked, "Weren't you saying you wanted coffee? I'll make it." She stood there for a few seconds longer, holding the spoon she hadn't yet handed over, then quietly walked out. She knew this was life. Children grow. Bonds shift. The girl who once held her son's hand to cross the street now held his heart, and that was how it was meant to be. But what no one explained was how a mother, who once meant everything, slowly becomes someone they just check on. They still cared. They still loved her. But not with the urgency they once did. And in that shift, respectful, natural, even beautiful, there was also loss. A soft erasure. A fading. She didn't resent her daughter-in-law. She only missed the days when she didn't have to ask to be seen. When her place in his heart was unquestioned. Now, she stood quietly at the door of every relationship, knocking gently, hoping someone still remembered who built the house they now called home. She cooks, cleans, manages, not because anyone asks, but because no one even thinks about it anymore. The day started like every other. She folded the prayer mat, adjusted the cushions, and moved quietly through the house like a shadow that cleaned up after everyone's life. The sink was full again. Plates stacked without a second thought. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work, not with complaint, not with pride, just with duty. Not because anyone told her to, but because if she didn't, who would? No one asked her to wash the clothes. No one requested the fresh roti with lunch. No one reminded her to check the medicine box or refill the sugar jar. But they all noticed when something was missing. "Ammy, there's no sugar in the tea. Where are my ironed pants? Why didn't anyone clean the living room?" She heard these things not with anger, but with an ache so old, it no longer hurt the way it used to. They didn't mean harm. They didn't even realize. She had been doing everything for so long that her work had become invisible, like air, like electricity. Present. Expected. Taken for granted. One evening, she stood in the kitchen, stirring lentils. Her back ached, but no one saw it. The TV in the lounge was loud. Her grandson was playing on the floor. Her daughter-in-law was doing something on the laptop. She paused, turned the stove off, and sat down on a stool. No one noticed the silence of the kitchen, because it never crossed anyone's mind that she might stop, that she might be tired, that she wasn't a machine. She was a mother, a wife, a woman whose service had become a routine so automatic. No one remembered it was love, not obligation, that made her do it. And when love isn't seen, it slowly turns into quiet resignation. In the family, tries to gently advise, only to be told she's overthinking. She had seen it before. A silence after a joke. A tone too sharp. A glance that lingered too long. Small things, like tiny cracks in a wall that once felt unbreakable. She noticed them not because she was interfering, but because she had lived enough years to understand what silence could grow into. Her daughter-in-law had been unusually quiet lately, more withdrawn. Her son, buried in work, came home and barely looked up from his phone. Conversations were shorter. Smiles more forced. At dinner one evening, when her son barely touched his food and her daughter-in-law left the table early with a stiff, "I'm tired," she took a breath. Later that night, she gently sat beside her son in the lounge. Beta, she began softly. Everything okay between you two? He looked up, surprised. Yeah, why wouldn't it be? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. She seems distant lately. Maybe talk to her? Just ask how she's feeling. Sometimes listening fixes more than arguing. He gave a half smile and shook his head. Amy, you always worry too much. It's nothing. You're just overthinking again. She nodded quietly, hiding the hurt behind a practiced smile. It wasn't the dismissal that stung, it was the fact that her care now felt like interference. She remembered when he was little, how he'd scrape his knee and come running to her without a word. How he'd cling to her until the tears stopped. Now, she saw his pain before he did. But he didn't need her voice anymore. Only her silence. The next day, she noticed another small shift, a cold reply, a missed meal, an unanswered call. She wanted to help. She had wisdom earned through sacrifice, through years of holding a house together with nothing but patience and faith. But wisdom, it seemed, was no longer welcome unless packaged in youth. She turned back to her room and whispered a prayer. If she couldn't be heard, then may her silence still protect them. May her unseen worry still be enough to shield them from the storm they didn't yet see coming. A family gathering happens in the living room. She's in the kitchen, hearing laughter that no longer reaches her. The sound of laughter poured from the living room, easy, loud, full of life. Plates clinked, snacks passed hand to hand, and someone turned on music that brought back old memories. She was in the kitchen, wiping the rim of a teacup. They hadn't asked her to make anything. She just knew they'd get hungry eventually, and no one thought ahead like a mother did. From behind the half-closed door, she heard her son say, "Remember that wedding trip to Islamabad? God, that hotel was a mess." Everyone laughed. Even the daughter-in-law's cousin added a story. She smiled faintly. She was on that trip. She had packed half the bags. She had stayed up with a fever so everyone else could enjoy the event. But her name wasn't in the story anymore. Just the memory of her work. She took a slow breath and turned toward the tray. 6 teacups, a plate of biscuits, and 2 bowls of warm samosas. As she approached the living room, her daughter-in-law stood up. "Oh, Amy, you didn't need to. We could have ordered." She smiled. "It's all right, Beta." The tray was taken from her hands. The snacks were passed around. And just like that, she disappeared again. No one asked her to sit. No one made space. She lingered for a moment by the door, hand resting on the back of a chair. Someone cracked another joke. More laughter. She turned back slowly, her footsteps quiet, and returned to the kitchen, her kingdom, her corner, her exile. She stood by the sink, not washing, not moving. Just listening. Listening to joy that once needed her to exist. Now it thrived without her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't jealous. But, oh, how deeply she missed being missed. One day, she doesn't cook. No one notices until they're hungry. That silence speaks volumes. That morning, she sat on her bed longer than usual. The call to prayer had come and gone. The sunlight slipped through the curtains. But for the first time in years, she didn't move toward the kitchen. She just sat. No rolling of dough. No clinking of spoons. No hum of the stove. She had always believed in love expressed through action. Warm parathas, hot chai, cut fruit, ironed clothes. But that love had become a given, not a gift. So today, she chose not to give. Not out of anger, but to see if anyone would notice her absence the way they noticed her presence. Hours passed. The house began to stir. Doors opened. Footsteps padded across the floor. From her room, she heard them. "Amy hasn't made tea yet? Is the stove not working? Did she go somewhere?" They peeked into the kitchen. Cold. Empty. The usual breakfast spread missing. A pause. A quiet discomfort. A realization settling in the air like dust on untouched furniture. Finally, her daughter-in-law called out hesitantly, "Amy, are you okay?" She opened the door gently. "Yes, Beta. Just thought I'd take a break today." A short silence followed. "Oh, okay. Should I make something?" "No need. I'm sure you'll figure it out." She didn't say it with bitterness. Just a soft reminder that this house didn't run on magic. It ran on someone's tired hands, on her effort, her love, her presence. For once, her absence did the talking. She sat in the courtyard with her tea, made just for herself, and listened to the confused clatter in the kitchen. They weren't helpless. They were just unaccustomed to looking where they never had to. Today, she reminded them without words that silence can sometimes speak louder than service. She writes a heartfelt letter, not to blame, but to explain how invisible she's become, and keeps it hidden. The house was asleep. A quiet hum of the ceiling fan. A clock ticking gently on the wall. Faint murmurs from the television left on downstairs. She sat at her small wooden table near the window, the night air drifting in and lifting the corner of an old dupatta hanging nearby. A pen in her hand, a blank page before her. She stared at it for a long time, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she didn't know where to begin. Then slowly she started to write. To the ones I love the most. I don't want to complain. And I'm not writing this because I expect anything to change. I'm writing this so that someday, if you ever wonder what I felt, you won't have to guess. I was once the voice that echoed through this house. Now, I've become the silence you don't notice. I used to be the hand that guided, the lap that comforted, the one who knew which spoon you preferred and how you liked your shirts folded. Now I'm the one who watches from doorways, waiting to be needed again. I hear your laughter and I smile. But sometimes I wish that laughter included me. Not out of pity, just out of memory. I cook, I clean, I sit quietly through your days. But lately I've started to wonder, if I stopped, would anyone remember who I was before I became background? I miss hearing my name with affection. Not just as a request, not just as a reminder. Sometimes I think about walking out of this house for a whole day, just to see who would notice first. But I never do, because I love you more than I love being seen. If you ever find this letter, know this. I don't want apologies. I just want to be remembered. Not for what I did,
but for who I am. Amy.
She folded the paper gently, like it held her soul. She placed it in a drawer under her shawls, not to be found today or tomorrow. But perhaps someday, when she was no longer around to explain it with her voice, her words would do it for her. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a quiet legacy of feeling unseen and still loving through it. One of her children finally sees her pain, in her tired eyes, in her quiet retreat, and says the words she's longed to hear. I miss you. I see you. The house felt unusually still that morning. Her son walked down the stairs, buttoning his shirt, glancing around. Amy, he called. No answer. He checked the kitchen. The stove was off. No scent of breakfast, no steaming cup of tea on the table. Just silence. It felt wrong, not loud, not alarming, just hollow. He walked to her room. The door was half open. She was sitting on the prayer mat, her hands folded in her lap. Not praying, not moving, just sitting. Her shoulders hunched slightly, her gaze distant, her expression unreadable. He paused. For the first time in months, maybe years, he really looked at her. Not as the woman who handled everything, not as the silent helper, not as Amy, where's my shirt? But as someone who was slowly disappearing inside her own home. Her hair had more silver than he remembered. Her hands, once firm and quick, now rested quietly on her knees, as if they no longer knew what to hold on to. He stepped forward and sat beside her. Quietly. No phone. No distraction. She turned, surprised. Everything okay? She asked softly. He didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked, and his throat tightened. I've been so busy, he finally said. I thought you were okay. I thought you were always okay. She smiled, tired. Mothers don't always get to not be okay. His eyes filled. He reached for her hand, gently wrapping his fingers around hers. Amy, he whispered, I miss you. I see you. She didn't cry, but something inside her softened, like a wall that had been standing for too long. Not because she needed to be praised, but because she needed to be seen, not for her work, not for her duties, but for her being. They sat there in silence, the kind of silence that heals, not wounds. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a stranger in her own house. She felt like a mother again, not forgotten, but remembered, not invisible, but visible.